My head looks like a pixelated egg. What's up, folks? This is Leaf, and today I want to talk to you about building decks for the new Shimmering Skies meta in Disney Lorcana. There are a lot of great new cards in this set, and some of them are going to change how we think about deck building. I want to talk first about how I think the meta is going to change, and then I want to look at how that will affect the way we build a deck and how we play it. We're going to start off with Sapphire Steel as an example, because Sapphire has some of the most exciting new toys to play with in Shimmering Skies. First off, there are two new cards that will impact the meta dramatically, and you probably already know what they are. First up is Daisy Duck, Donald's Date. Daisy is probably the strongest aggro card we've seen to date. With 4 willpower, she cannot be easily removed in the first couple of turns. To balance this power, she gives her opponent a free card, which is a pretty big trade-off. If you play Daisy Duck, you're counting on getting a big lead before your opponent can use the extra resources you might be giving them. The power of Daisy means that you're going to see a lot of aggro decks, especially in the first part of the set, and the meta overall will be faster. Any deck you build has to be able to answer Daisy and prevent your opponent from running away with the game. We'll look at tailoring our Sapphire Steel deck specifically to answer Daisy. The second card that will drastically alter the meta in Shimmering Skies is Pete, Game's Referee. Pete is a 3-cost inkable 3/3 that quests for 1 and has the ability Blow the Whistle. When you play this character, opponents can't play actions until the start of your next turn. This is a huge ability on an inkable card, and you're going to see a lot of decks running multiples of Pete. No actions means no songs, no whole new world, no be prepared, no under the sea, no grab your sword, no sudden chill. A crafty player can anticipate when their opponent is likely to play one of these powerful actions and give themselves a risk-free turn. You could go wide and play a lot of characters, then play Pete to make sure you don't get board wiped by Be Prepared. If your Steel Song opponent is dumping their hand, and you have something you need to play next turn that you don't want Whole New World to discard, Pete saves the day. There's so many possibilities. What Pete means for the meta is that, maybe not right away, but over time we're going to move to a more character-oriented meta. What I mean by that is playing a deck with fewer actions and more characters that make a big splash when played. You don't want to be caught with a hand full of actions when your opponent plays Pete, because you'll miss a whole turn and fall behind. Fewer actions also dovetails with how we can be smart about building a deck to beat Daisy Duck. If you have more characters in your deck, you're more likely to get to keep the card that Daisy lets you draw. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Sapphire Steel, which was one of the top color combinations in the previous set, and see how we can adjust it for this whole new world we're in with Shimmering Skies. This is a first draft, and there will still be plenty of time for changes when we find out what else we're up against. That's what meta really means. There is no best perfect deck. It's all about giving yourself the tools to answer your opponents and outplay them. At first glance, the core of the deck is still there. You've got 8 Popsicles with Hiram Flavorsham for card draw power, Fishbone Quill for the extra ink per turn, Cogsworth to protect your characters in challenges and versus steel matchups, and Tamatoa with Lucky Dime to fish more Popsicles from your discard and finish off the game. But there are also some pretty big changes. We're running way fewer actions. I might have gone a little too far, but I really want to test the limits of how successful we can be with a limited action deck. 1. No Whole New World. If you're facing an aggro deck, the last thing you want is to refill their hand with 1-cost characters to dump next turn. There's also no 1 Jump Ahead. 1 Jump is a great card, but it is uninkable and leaves your board empty on turn 2. We'll look to replace 1 Jump's ramp with some new characters to make sure we have early board presence. The only actions we're keeping are Grab Your Sword, which is one of the best anti-aggro tools in the game, and Baboom for picking off the stray Diablo or Flynn that could ruin your day in the first few turns. Let's look at the new toys Sapphire has to play with that we're going to add to the deck. First up in the 2 slot is Tipo, Growing Sun. Tipo lets you ink a card from your hand when you play him, so he's filling the 1 jump role here, albeit costing you a card from your hand instead of the top of your deck. I also like him as a backup for Fishbone Quill to make sure you're ramping in the first few turns. Our other new 2-drop is Chicha, Dedicated Mother. She's uninkable, but draws you a card every turn that you ink a second card, whether from Tipo or Quill or one of the other Sapphire ramp options. In my limited testing, Chicha seems super powerful, especially if you can get more than 1 on the board. Replacing that inked card, combined with the usual card draw from Hiram, can fill out your hand really fast and keep your engine running full steam ahead. Pete is the next new card, and he's an easy 4-of to start for all of the reasons we talked about earlier. Play Pete on the right turn, and you can shut down or delay your opponent's game plan to give yourself the edge. Similarly, the new Sapphire Belle of the Ball works as an alternate Pete. Drop her in to give all your characters ward for a turn, and she has ward herself. Your opponent can still play actions, but Belle stops a lot of removal, including character-based removal like Madame Medusa. If they play a Bee King Undisputed or Lady Tremaine, you can always choose your Belle to take one for the team and keep your board intact. The two of these cards together, Pete and Belle, offer incredible protection from removal, and will change the way your opponents have to play against you. Kuzco's Selfish Emperor is another new Sapphire card that takes a sometimes useful action, Rise of the Titans, and makes it more useful by putting it into character form. Kuzco quests for 2, which makes him better than the new Shift Simba for our purposes. And while giving your opponent an ink might seem like a downside, the potential in the mirror to put an item like Lucky Dime in your opponent's inkwell to make sure it won't come back with a Tamatoa is pretty strong. Or at least, it probably won't come back from the inkwell. Mufasa, Ruler of Pride Rock, is the first card in Disney Lorcana with inkwell manipulation. This 4/9 legendary quests for 4, and has arguably one of the strongest abilities ever introduced to the game. When Mufasa quests, you ready all cards in your inkwell. In other words, you can spend all your ink, quest with Mufasa for 4, and then spend all your ink again. 2 Tamatoas in one turn, or a Tamatoa and a dime, is entirely possible with Mufasa. The trade-off is that when you play him, you exert your entire inkwell and return 2 cards at random to your hand. But think about it for a second. You often ink high-value cards that you can't play early on, so there's a decent chance you're sending a couple strong cards back to your hand. What's more, if you play Mufasa before you ink for turn, you can return the cards to your hand, ink 2 other cards of your choice with Quill, draw another card with Chicha, and you're off to the races. When I first saw this card, I was afraid it was only a win more card. A card that, by the time you play it, you're already winning and it just makes you win faster. But Mufasa is for real. Sapphire Steel was already the king of come-from-behind wins, and Mufasa can enable that win even sooner. Thank you, Ariel, but your services are no longer required. That's it for new cards. Rounding out the deck, there are a couple of other choices you might have noticed. I included 2 Hades Infernal Schemer, since they're removal in character form, and an obvious choice for a deck going light on actions. I also included Tinkerbell Tiny Tactician as a shift target for Big Tink. This, to me, is the answer to the Amber Amethyst Daisy Duck aggro deck. Little Tink isn't a powerful card on her own, but she has 4 willpower, is harder to remove, she's out of range of Befuddle, which a lot of Daisy lists are running, and the threat of the shift to Big Tink demands immediate attention, especially for an aggro deck. Shifting in Big Tink instead of just playing her outright means you do 1 damage to your opponent's entire board, which takes out a lot of aggro characters like Lilo and Maleficent. Then you can immediately attack and get a 2-for-1 with her Puny Pirate ability, since your opponent is questing and all their characters are probably exerted. You can also send Grab Your Sword to finish off any stragglers. Worst case, your opponent will have to respect the shift, so playing Little Tink can buy you a turn even if you don't have a Big Tink in hand. Next up, let's look at how to actually play this deck. In a perfect world, you might think we open with some kind of Popsicle on 1, Chicha on 2, Fishbone Quill on 3 to start drawing from Chicha, and then Hiram on 4 to draw even more. This does set up Chicha for maximum card draw, but is a pretty slow start in terms of board presence. We don't want to risk questing to Chicha unless it's completely safe. The opener that makes more sense is Popsicle 1, Tipo on 2 to ink an extra card, and Hiram on 3. That leaves you to Chicha and Fishbone Quill on 4, get a free card from Chicha with your Quill, and even play another Popsicle if you've got it from the ink that you just quilled. And quest with Hiram to draw off of that Popsicle. You're off to the races. Unlike Chicha, we're happy to trade Tipo in a challenge because he doesn't do anything after we play him. Against the Daisy Duck aggro deck, the best opener is Popsicle 1, Tipo 2, Little Tink 3, and shift in Big Tink on 4 for maximum destruction. Once you've wiped their board, it is a lot easier to get the game under control. The great thing about playing against aggro is they have no answers for what we do. They're just trying to ignore the board and race to the finish. When Daisy's questing, because our deck is 2/3 characters, she's usually giving us more cards to ink. Their Amethyst Chromacon also gives us cards, but it's still important to remove it as soon as possible so they can't refill their hand again. In other matchups that run more removal, like Ruby Amethyst, Steel Song, or Lemon Lime Discard, Pete and Bell are the real stars. Anticipating what your opponent wants to play and playing these cards at the right moments to deny them are key to taking the victory. Against discard, focus on getting card draw going and avoid inking too much from your hand. This is a matchup where I'm not as sure about Tipo, and if I were going to see a lot of discard, I might prefer Mickey Mouse Detective, or maybe even the new Donald Duck to ramp with ink from the top of your deck instead. One new card I was interested in adding, but couldn't quite find a place for it yet, Sheriff of Nottingham Bushel Breeches. The Sheriff is an uninkable 9-cost 5/9 with support that quests for 4, and costs 1 ink less for each item you have in play. It seems like an obvious choice for Sapphire Steel. Sapphire Steel always has plenty of items, and the Sheriff could easily cost only 5 or 6 rather quickly. He's a huge character, who can use support to help another character take out a location, while still questing for a lot of lore. In my testing so far, however, I found that when I was going to play the Sheriff, I would almost always rather play Tamatoa or Mufasa. The Sheriff is a great card and might still find his way in here eventually, but for now, space is limited and Mufasa and Tamatoa are just better win conditions. I also like Jafar Tyrannical Hypnotist. This card could be extremely powerful in a character-heavy meta, blocking the majority of characters from challenging you. While Jafar is vulnerable to Ruby removal with 0 strength, he demands an answer from your opponent because he stifles most of the standard Ruby Amethyst board. Many people evaluate a card by its downside, the old Dies to Medusa standby, but my philosophy is, fine, make them play it. Be the aggressor and challenge them to have that card that they need. If they don't, you will run away with the game. Just like Diablo last set. When the upside is so high, it is often worth the risk to include it. Follow Jafar up with a bell, and your board is virtually untouchable. The other card on the margins is And Then Along Came Zeus. I'm a Steel Song player at heart, so having access to singable removal that destroys so many different characters is hard to resist. Like I said before though, I want to see how light on actions we can go in order to be less vulnerable to Pete. Too much removal can also be a crutch, letting you play reactively to your opponent instead of forcing you to take the reins and make them answer you. The addition of Mufasa has the potential to really speed this deck up, and I want to make sure that the deck is consistent with playing the aggressor. That's what meta really means, knowing what most of your opponents will be playing and tailoring your deck to have the solutions ahead of time. It's the part of Lorcana that I enjoy the most. The victories are so satisfying when you know you made the right call. So that about wraps it up. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video or have suggestions for what else to include, let me know in the comments. I played a lot of Amber Steel last set, so I'm planning to make a new version of that deck in the near future. If you'd like to see more, please consider subscribing. Until next time, don't forget to have fun.